Hello and welcome to another episode of Radiating Literature. By the way, it was decided last night that this move is called the Holly. So, when we can all hit the club again, everyone do the Holly. You'll be the coolest chick, or dude, or whatever. I promise. Okay, so we are now on to Chapter 5 called Mrs. Renaud's Story. And again, I'm going to be skipping whenever they want me to say Monsieur in front of every goddamn name because it's so annoying. So everyone's just going by the last name. Okay. We found Hotet awaiting us in the hall, and we all proceeded upstairs together. Francois, sticking with that, don't care that it's a man's name and it's supposed to be an old lady. Francois, marching ahead to show us the way. Poirot went up in a zigzag fashion which puzzled me, and me, until he whispered with a grimace, "No wonder the servants heard Renaud mounting the stairs. Not a board of them but creaks fit to wake the dead." Rude. At the head of the staircase, a small passage branched off. "The servants' quarters," explained Bex. I don't remember who Bex is. We continued along a corridor, and Francois tapped on the last door to the right of it. A faint voice bade us enter. Sorry. Actually, I think that was funny. And we passed into a large, sunny apartment. I think of like where I live as an apartment, not like something within a house being an apartment, but whatever. Okay. To a large, sunny apartment looking out towards the sea, which showed blue and sparkling about a quarter of a mile distant. Why are you using miles and not kilometers? Anyways. On a couch, propped up with cushions and attended by Dr. Durand, lay a tall, striking-looking woman. She's just striking. She's not striking-looking. Anyways. She was middle-aged, and her once dark hair was now almost entirely silvered, but the intense vitality and strength of her personality would have made itself felt anywhere. You knew at once that you were in the presence of what the French called un matisse fin. My best try, y'all. She greeted us with a dignified inclination of the head. "Pray be seated, messieurs." We took chairs at the magistrate's clerk, and the magistrate's clerk established himself at a round table. "I hope, madame," began Hotet, "that we will not distress you unduly to relate to us what occurred last night?" "Not at all, monsieur. Not at all, like your husband was murdered. Not at all. I know the value of time. If these scoundrelly assassins are to be caught and punished." "Very well, madame. It will fatigue you less, I think, if I ask you questions and you confine yourself to answering them. At what time did you go to bed last night?" "At 9:30, monsieur. I was tired." "And your husband?" "About an hour later, I fancy." "Did he seem disturbed, upset in any way?" "No more than usual." "Is he usually disturbed?" "Okay. You should have looked into that. Okay. What happened then?" "We slept. I was awakened by a hand being pressed over my mouth. I tried to scream, but the hand prevented me. There were 2 men in the room. They were both masked." "Can you describe them at all, madame?" "One was very tall and had a long black beard. The other was short and stout. His beard was reddish. They both wore hats pulled down over their eyes." Hats? This is so... A hat pulled down over the eyes. Is that a mask? Okay, anyways. Said the magistrate thoughtfully. "Too much beard, I fear." "You mean they were false?" "Yes, madame, but continue your story. How do you know the beards were false from this?" "Okay. It was the short man who was holding me. He forced a gag in my mouth and then bound me with rope hand and foot. The other man was standing over my husband. He had caught up my little dagger paper knife from the dressing table and was holding it with the point just over his heart. When the short man had finished with me, he joined the other, and they forced my husband to get up and accompany them into the dressing room next door. I was nearly fainting with terror. Nevertheless, I listened desperately. I realize I'm reading her as though she's lying, but I really think she's lying. So, that's how it's gonna be. They were speaking in too low a tone for me to hear what they said, but I recognized the language, a bastard Spanish, such as is spoken in some parts of South America. Cool, your husband was like from South America, you could have just said it was like South American Spanish, but instead we decided to get racist with it. Yeah, I don't like this girl. Okay. They seemed to be demanding something from my husband, and presently they grew angry, and their voices rose a little. I think the tall man was speaking. How can you freaking tell if it's the tall or the short man speaking? You can't even see them. You know what we want, he said. The secret! Where is it? You would just say what it is. Like, you would just say, like, the location of the spies, or the code for the vault, or the diamonds, or something. I do not know what my husband answered, but the other replied fiercely, You lie! We know you have it. Where are your keys? Also, I thought you just said you couldn't hear what they said. But now we got, like, some specific sentences. Okay. Then I heard sounds of drawers being pulled out. There is a safe on the wall of my husband's dressing room, in which he always keeps a fairly large amount of ready money. Leonie tells me this has been rifled, and the money taken, but evidently what they were looking for was not there. How do you know it wasn't there? If money was taken, something else might have been taken. For presently I heard the tall man, heard the tall man with an oath command my husband to dress himself. Soon after that, I think some noise in the house must have disturbed them, for they hustled my husband out of the room only half dressed. Pardon? Interrupted Poirot. There is, then, no other egress from the dressing room? No, monsieur. There is only the communicating door into my room. They hurried my husband through, the short man in front and the tall man behind, with the dagger still in his hand. Paul tried to break away to come to me. I saw his agonized eyes. He turned to his captors. I must speak to her, he said. Then, coming to the side of the bed, It's all right, Eloise, he said. Do not be afraid. I shall return before morning. But although he tried to make his voice confident, I could see the terror in his eyes. Then they hustled him out of the door, the tall man saying, One sound and you are a dead man, remember. After that, continued Mrs. Renaud, I must have fainted. The next thing I recollect is Leonie rubbing my wrists and giving me brandy. That's always my first thing when I see someone in trouble. I'm like, yo, wait right here, gonna get you brandy. Okay. Madame Renaud, said the magistrate, had you any idea what it was for which the assassins were searching? None whatever, monsieur. Had you any knowledge that your husband feared something? Yes, I had seen the change in him. How long ago was that? Mrs. Renaud reflected. 10 days, perhaps. Not longer. Possibly. I only noticed it then. Did you question your husband at all as to the cause? Once. He put me off evasively. Nevertheless, I was convinced that he was suffering some terrible anxiety. However, since he evidently wished to conceal the fact from me, I tried to pretend that I noticed nothing. Cool. Were you aware that he had called in the services of a detective? A detective! Exclaimed Mrs. Renaud, very much surprised. Yes, this gentleman, Hercule Poirot. Poirot bowed. He arrived today in response to a summons from your husband, and taking the letter written by Renaud from his pocket, he handed it to the lady. She read it with apparently genuine astonishment. I had no idea of this. Evidently he was fully cognizant of the danger. Now, madame, I will beg you to be frank with me. Is there any incident in your husband's past life in South America, which might throw light on his murder? Mrs. Renaud reflected deeply. I'm just wondering what that is like. That's my impression of reflecting deeply. But at last shook her head. I can think of none. Certainly my husband had many enemies, people he had got the better of in some way or another. Why are you with him then? But I can think of no one distinctive case. She's just like, there are a lot of people who wanted to kill him. I can't, pick from between all the people who might have wanted to kill him. That's your job. I did not say there was no such incident, only that I'm not aware of it. The examining magistrate stroked his beard disconsolately. I don't quite know what that means. And you can fix the time of this outrage? Yes, I distinctly remember hearing the clock on the mantelpiece strike 2. She nodded towards an 8-day traveling clock in a leather case which stood in the center of the chimney-piece. I feel like that's going to be important because they added so much detail. Poirot rose from his seat, scrutinized the clock carefully, and nodded, satisfied. And here, too, exclaimed Bex, is a wristwatch knocked off the dressing table by the assassins, without doubt, and smashed to atoms. That's a fun phrase, smashed to atoms. I'm going to use that. Little did they know it would testify against them. Gently he picked away the fragments of broken glass. Suddenly, his face changed to one of utter stupefaction. Mon Dieu! He ejaculated. We have to stop with this, guys. We have to stop. What is it? The hands of the clock point to 7 o'clock. Sorry, the hands of the watch point to 7 o'clock. What? Cried the examining magistrate, astonished. But Poirot, deft as ever, took the broken trinket from the startled commissary and held it to his ear. Yeah, screw fingerprints, right? Doesn't matter. Then he smiled. The glass is broken, yes, but the watch itself is still going. The explanation of the mystery was greeted with a relieved smile, but the magistrate bethought him of another point. But surely it is not 7 o'clock now. No, Poirot said gently. It's a few minutes after 5. Possibly the watch gains. Is that so, madame? Mrs. Renaud was frowning perplexedly. That's a rough one for me. It does gain, she admitted, but I've never known it to gain quite so much as that. Or maybe it's in a different time zone. Anyone ever think of that? Whatever. If only we could have had fingerprints on it before everyone touched it. With a gesture of impatience, the magistrate left the matter of the watch and proceeded with his interrogatory. Just say interrogation, Jesus. Madame, the front door was found ajar. It seems almost certain that the murderers entered that way. It has not been forced at all. Can you suggest an explanation? Possibly my husband went out for a stroll the last thing and forgot to latch it when he came in. Is that a very likely thing to happen? Very. My husband was the most absent-minded of men. You're so calmly speaking about him when he was, murdered a matter of hours ago. There was a slight frown on her brow as she spoke, as though the trait in the dead man's character had at times vexed her. There is one inference I think we might draw, remarked the commissary suddenly. Since the men insisted on Renaud dressing himself, it looks as though the place they were taking him to, the place where the secret was concealed, lay some distance away. Or was just in a place where they would need him to be dressed like a bank. I'm pretty sure, I know this was written a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure security deposit boxes were still a thing back then. So it's it would be pretty weird if a guy showed up in his pajamas with two dudes and was like, yo, I need to get that in my security deposit box. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. They're with me. It's fine. Anyways. The magistrate nodded. Yes, far, and yet not too far, since he spoke of being back by morning. What time does the last train leave the station of Merlinville? Asked Poirot. 11:50 one way, and 12:17 the other. But it is more probable that they had a motor waiting. Of course, agreed Poirot, looking somewhat crestfallen. Indeed, that might have been one way of tracing them, continued the magistrate, brightening. A motor containing 2 foreigners is quite likely to have been noticed. That is an excellent point, Bex. He smiled to himself, and then, becoming grave once more, he said to Mrs. Renaud, There is another question. Do you know anyone of the name Duveen? Duveen, Mrs. Renaud repeated thoughtfully. No, for the moment I cannot say I do. Have you ever heard your husband mention anyone of that name? Never. Do you know anyone whose Christian name is Bella? You're all also acting like Bella doesn't just mean beautiful. It'd be like if you just signed it like Sweetie. It doesn't have to be her Christian name. He watched Mrs. Renaud narrowly as he spoke, seeking to surprise any signs of anger or consciousness, but she merely shook her head in quite a natural manner. He continued his question. Are you aware that your husband had a visitor last night? Now he saw the red mount slightly in her cheeks, but she replied composedly, No, who was that? A lady. Indeed. But for the moment the magistrate was content to say no more. It seemed unlikely that Madame Dubreuil had any connection with the crime, and he was anxious not to upset Mrs. Renaud more than necessary. He made a sign to the commissary, and the latter replied with a nod. Then, rising, he went across the room and returned with the glass jar we had seen in the outhouse in his hand. From this he took the dagger. Madame, he said gently, do you recognize this? She gave a little cry. Ah! Sorry, that's my impression. Yes, that is my little dagger. Then she saw the stained point, and she drew back, her eyes widening in horror. Is that blood? You guys are being so mean to this lady. Okay. Yes, madame, your husband was killed with this weapon. He removed it hastily from sight. You are quite sure about its being the one that was on your dressing table last night? Oh, yes, it was a present from my son. He was in the Air Force during the war. War is capitalized, so, but this would have been written. I assume this has to be referring to World War I. He gave his age as older than it was. There was a touch of the proud mother in her voice. This was made from a streamlined airplane wire, and was given to me by my son as a souvenir of the war. I see, madame. That brings us to another matter. Your son, where is he now? It is necessary that he should be telegraphed to without delay. Jack? He is on his way to Buenos Aires. Again, why do we spell it this way? It's spelled, Buenos is fine. Aires is Ayres. Whatever. What? Yes, my husband telegraphed to him yesterday. He had sent him on business to Paris, but yesterday he discovered that it would be necessary for him to proceed without delay to South America. There was a boat leaving Cherbourg, my best try, for Buenos Aires last night, and he wired him to catch it. Have you any knowledge of what the business in Buenos Aires was? No, monsieur. I know nothing of the nature, but Buenos Aires is not my son's final destination. He was going overland from there to Santiago. And in unison the magistrate and the commissary exclaimed, Santiago! Again, Santiago! Again, there's literally exclamation points for this. They're just screaming at this lady, Santiago. Okay. It was at this moment when we were all stunned. Oops, sorry, I forgot to mute my computer. It was at this moment when we were all stunned by the mention of that word that Poirot approached Mrs. Renaud. He had been standing by the window like a man lost in a dream, and I doubt if he had fully taken in what had passed. He paused by the lady's side with a little bow. Pardon, madame, but may I examine your wrists? Though slightly surprised at the request, Mrs. Renaud held them out to him. Round each of them was a cruel red mark where the cords had bitten into the flesh. As he examined them, I fancied the momentary flicker of excitement I had seen in his eyes disappeared. They must cause you great pain, he said, and once more he looked puzzled. But the magistrate was speaking excitedly. Young Mr. Renaud must be communicated with at once by wireless. It is vital that we should know anything he can tell us about this trip to Santiago. He hesitated. I hope he might have been near at hand so that we could have saved you pain, madame. He paused. You mean, she said in a low voice, the identification of my husband's body? The magistrate bowed his head. I am a strong woman, monsieur. I can bear all that is required of me. I am ready. Now. Oh, tomorrow will be quite soon enough, I assure you. I prefer to get it over, she said in a low tone. Oops, my bad. A spasm of pain crossing her face. If you will be so good as to give me your arm, doctor. The doctor hastened forward, a cloak was thrown over Mrs. Renaud's shoulders, and a slow procession went down the stairs. Bex hurried on ahead to open the door of the shed. In a minute or two, Mrs. Renaud appeared in the doorway. She was very pale, but resolute. Behind her, Hotette was clacking commiserations and apologies like an animated hen. She raised her hands to her face. A moment, messieurs, while I steel myself. She took her hand away and looked down at the dead man. Then the marvelous self-control which had upheld her so far deserted her. Paul! She cried. Husband! Do people just say, like, husband or wife or girlfriend or whatever? Oh, God. And pitching forward, she fell unconscious to the ground. Whoop. Instantly, Poirot was beside her. He raised the lid of her eye, felt her pulse. Not the doctor? There's literally a doctor here. Then when he had satisfied himself that she had really fainted, he drew aside. He caught me by the arm. I am an imbecile, my friend. If ever there was a love and grief in a woman's voice, I heard it then. My little idea was all wrong. Eh bien, I must start again. All right, and that is the end of Chapter 5.